information about a variety of plants. Sorry, the recording is talking to me. A variety of native plants and our traditional uses for them. Of course, I'm going to talk a lot about our native plants that can be used for food and seasoning and teas and things of that sort, especially because I feel like it provides a really great opportunity to connect students and young people and anyone with our spaces and our places, and to really create a sense of grounding in the world around us. So I am going to share my screen, if I can manage to figure that out. There we go. And I'm gonna roll with this. I do want to cover a couple of things briefly because I'm going to be using some terminology that may be unfamiliar to some folks. So I'm going to use the term food sovereignty a lot, and because it's the field that I work in. Food sovereignty, of course, is a specific type of sovereignty, and it goes beyond food security. And so I want to define that term first of all, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the pillars of Indigenous food systems. So I'm going to jump into this definition of food sovereignty because it really has these multiple legs that form the definition. So food sovereignty is the right of people to healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate foods harvested through ecologically sound and sustainable methods. So this is the term that was really defined by La Via Campesina and the peasants movement and is used by the United Nations. And it's the term that I feel addresses the different components of food sovereignty so much. So you want to make sure that when building food systems, we're really working towards food systems that are healthy, obviously giving people their basic nutritional needs, affordable. Everyone in the community at every socioeconomic level should be able to access food that is healthy, culturally appropriate. We want to make sure that people are eating foods that they recognize as foods. And then of course, that we're not damaging our land, water, air, ecosystems with the methods that we're using to plant. Hold on one second, I have a crying puppy. Perfect. I also want to emphasize another pillar that I didn't even put on this list, and that is the ability to write policies and regulate the systems that govern food sovereignty and food codes. As sovereign nations, Indigenous tribes have the ability to write their own food and agricultural codes. So I think that's something that needs to be remembered when we talk about Indigenous food systems. I also love using this graphic. This, of course, comes from the nonprofit started by Sean Sherman and the Sous Chef organization. Their nonprofit is NATIVS, which is North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems. And I love this graphic. And of course, I always think of native graphic design as like throw a medicine wheel on it. But in this case, it's really applicable. And so I love looking at the different interconnectedness of food systems. It's not just what we're eating, but it's all of the knowledge that surrounds what we're eating. It's all of the methods of identification and harvesting and sustainability and all of that that goes right along with the actual foods themselves. It's preparation methods. It's hold on one second. Of course, I pulled out plants and now I have little cedar branches on the ground that the puppies are eating, which is fine. And so I really like thinking about all of this as we work to revitalize these food systems, as we learn more about Indigenous food systems in general. And then, of course, this graphic is available on the NATIVS website under their resources page. So if this is something that catches your eye and you want to study it more and really dive into more of it, definitely pull it up on the NATIVS website. If anyone was in Bozeman, I think Sean Sherman was speaking there yesterday. So definitely folks in the area working in the same fields. For you guys, I really want to jump into talking about plants. A lot of what I do is cooking demonstrations. It's using indigenous plants. It's talking about foods, but it's using our plants as part of a meal. And really, I just want to talk about the plants without talking about meal specifics. I want to tell the story of the plants, where they come from, how we use them, and really incorporate some of that knowledge. So, of course, I do have recipe videos that are available online. And do incorporate a lot of our traditional foods of Montana and around Turtle Island. So I will drop my website at the very end, but it's just indigikitchen.com. So you're always welcome to follow that as well. Show videos to your students. That is all something that's very welcome. And I try to make those resources available for folks. I'm going to talk you guys through a whole bunch of foods, but of course, these you may recognize as our service berries, also called Saskatoon berries, also called June berries, also called Okanoke, also called Savis berries. Lots of different names for these wonderful berries. And it will be my first slide after this, but it's really important food for Blackfeet people, but also for a lot of other folks around Montana as well. I also have some bison and wild rice meatballs with a nice Savis berry sauce. And then off to the side, I have some prairie turnips, which are known by a couple other names. Blackfeet traditionally call them moss, M-A''S. And I will tell you the story of where they came from, but it does show you guys these beautiful prairie turnips. And then, of course, you may know them also as timshila, which is from Dakota people farther to the east. There we go, my directions. But I'll talk about some of those foods as well. So have to talk about service berries. Of course, we love service berries because they are so plentiful. They grow all around the eastern side of the mountains, and they really have this incredible method of ripening at different times throughout the summer. So you'll notice that there is not one period, not a couple of weeks, where you have service berries that are ripe, but really you have a month and a half of time where your service berries are ripening over the summer. And so you can pick some ripe ones in mid-July all the way through the end of August. You can keep picking berries as they gradually ripen. This is probably one of the reasons that commercial cultivators haven't picked up service berries as much as their taste would warrant, because they're really difficult to harvest all at one time, which of course commercial agriculture wants things that can be rapidly harvested and made incredibly efficient. I'm using scare quotes if you're not watching me on the screen, but service berries are amazing. They have some interesting properties. There's some peer-reviewed studies that document their ability to regulate blood sugar, as well as their effect, that berries affect themselves on individuals that have Parkinson's disease. So there's some interesting peer-reviewed studies on using service berries to treat both diabetes as well as Parkinson's, which is interesting. And then, of course, service berries were traditionally harvested in that midsummer time, and then they were dried out. And you can dry these berries until they're practically rock hard, and then they can be rehydrated throughout the winter months. So these berries, even though they were often consumed fresh, were also dried, and then could be made into berry soup. They could be made into pemmican, and they could be used as a dried snack food throughout the winter, which made them incredibly beneficial to Blackfeet people. I will also point out that they're a wonderful fruit wood. So if you find a nice thick patch of service berries, that is a wood that is strong enough to be used to be made into bows, and the leaves can be made into a tea as well. Choke cherries, I'm here to talk about berries. So I'm also going to mention choke cherries because they were also super important to the Blackfeet people. Choke cherries, of course, if you look up choke cherries on a botanical website, you will probably see that the pits are listed as poisonous. That is because of the cyanide compounds that affect the body. So you're told not to eat the pits. However, Blackfeet people traditionally did eat the pits. The methods that we used to eat choke cherries were to actually pound the choke cherries, pits and all, into a type of pulp, kind of like this fruity mash, and then dry them in little patties, kind of like you're seeing in this picture. And you can see the pits are part of this, but that drying process neutralizes the cyanic compounds in them. And so it actually has no effect. Obviously, no one is dying of cyanide poisoning from eating choke cherries, despite websites telling you that they will kill you. And what's interesting is that the studies that Western medicine is conducting now are demonstrating the effects of choke cherry pits and their cancer fighting properties. So traditionally, folks in South Dakota, folks that were, I think there's a Lakota researcher that actually did this study, but she made choke cherry pudding traditionally with pits. And, you know, it was through this drying process that it was neutralized. Cooking will also neutralize these compounds. And she was always told that this would fight cancer. And so when she was studying it, she actually used choke cherry pudding made just with choke cherry juice versus choke cherry pudding made the traditional way with pits. And then this choke cherry pudding was put onto essentially petri dishes of ovarian cancer cells. Hold on one second. And the choke cherry pudding that was made in the traditional way with the pits was actually able to slow and stop the growth of the cancer cells, whereas the choke cherry pudding made with just the juice had no effect on the cancer cells. So I find that really interesting as well. Again, choke cherries can be made into pemmican or just eaten like these little dried fruit patties. And Blackfeet people traditionally waited until after the first frost to pick these choke cherries because it made them all the sweeter. Choke cherries are not particularly sweet by themselves, so any little boost that they can get is helpful. Let's see, and oh, did I? Yep, that is my slide. Okay. You may recognize this plant. This isn't the best picture ever, but this is a lamb's quarter plant. It's in the Chimpodium genus. It is amazingly delicious. You, if you have a garden, have probably seen this in your garden as a weed, but it's really wonderful. If you taste the leaves, they taste almost exactly like spinach. But what's really cool about this, in addition to just being a great wild green, it's also a really cool example of a plant that has archaeological evidence to document its presence in our camps back to at least the 1500s. So the seeds from this are really closely related to like a quinoa or an amaranth, very similar, closer size to amaranth seeds, very teeny, tiny. And Blackfeet people would cook them and eat them like you would with amaranth, which is incredibly cool. And it's interesting to find the archaeological evidence of this dating back. So I find lamb's quarter a really great wild green. I'd let it stay in my gardens because it feeds me, and it's even happier to grow than even spinach. So I'll keep it around. Just a couple of other delicious wild greens. Saving some edible flowers for you guys in here. Of course, one of these is fireweed. So this is our fireweed. Fireweed makes a great flower. I mean, it grows a beautiful flower, but the flower itself is also edible. In addition, fireweed leaves, you know, when you roll a leaf and that membrane breaks and it moistens the leaf, because fireweed is native to the entire northern hemisphere, it has a lot of uses in other parts of the world as well. And so across Siberia and into Eastern Europe, fireweed Leaves were actually rolled into little balls. They were put in a jar and then fermented over a couple of days. You don't want them to go moldy, obviously. And then you would take them out and dry them out. You could put them in an oven at a very low temperature, or blow a fan across them, or whatever method you have for drying. You could sun dry them. But it would create this fermented fireweed leaf tea. If you look it up, it's colloquially called Ivan chai. Ivan because popular first name in Russia where it was consumed, and chai because tea. And it's interesting because this tea was so popular that there were big factories that made it. And Hitler was so afraid of the Ivan chai giving the Russians superpowers that he targeted the Ivan chai factories. There's a fun fact about fireweed for you. But the flowers are delicious and edible. They do taste a little bit sweeter earlier in the year. So if you're going to pick fireweed flowers, they'll probably taste a little bit better in June than August for sure. And then, of course, this other little beautiful yellow plant down here is a glacier lily. Glacier lilies have another edible flower, and kind of slightly mild and sweet. It's not bitter at all. Doesn't have an overwhelming flavor, but glacier lilies are, of course, present as soon as the snow melts. So they're one of the first flowers that we see. So we see glacier lilies wherever the snow is receding. It's a great sign of spring. More flowers. So this is Arrowleaf balsam roots. I know that folks down by Missoula are probably familiar with Arrowleaf balsam root. They grow all over those dry hillsides. We have them all over the reservation. They're all over Wild Horse Island in the middle of Flathead Lake. We see them a lot. Arrowleaf balsam root is a really cool plant with several uses. You can see the root on the right-hand side of the screen there, and the root is edible. However, if you're going to eat the root, you want to harvest it early in the spring, because the longer it goes in the summer, the more of a woody bark it'll get on the outside of it. And then it can be cooked like a root vegetable, boiled into a stew or something like that. You could even dry it, grind it into like a flour to thicken your stew. That's an option. The shoots of the arrowleaf balsam root were often used as a flavoring for Blackfeet food. So they were added into soups and stews and things like that, just a seasoning for folks. One of the coolest things about this plant is actually those big arrow-shaped leaves were used much in the same way that you would use like a corn husk or a banana leaf as a tool to wrap food in, to cook it in hot coals, or to be able to offer that protection barrier between your hot cooking tool and your food. So arrowleaf balsam root has a lot of really cool uses, among them seasonings, cooking tools, and of food itself. This is a plant that some people may be familiar with. I had posted it on an earlier slide. This is, of course, our Petimodium esculentum, or Sorrelia esculenta. Has two different scientific names. I think the first one is the one that they've more recently decided is the name. But this is our prairie turnip. So this is our moss. And our prairie turnips actually are an important part of our Sundance ceremonies here on Blackfeet Nation. But they actually tell of a woman named Feather Woman who fell in love with Morning Star. She would gaze up at the sky and she'd think, wow, that is such a beautiful star. If that star was a man, I'd marry him. And one day Morning Star showed up and he was a man, and he did decide to marry Feather Woman. And so he whisked her away to Sky World. And of course, Morning Star was often on the move, often traveling. And so, well, spending time with Morning Star's mother, Kokomiki-sum, the moon, she was trying to figure out something to do, and Kokomiki-sum told her she could go dig the turnips that grew on the prairies of Sky World. And so she gave her a digging stick and she let her go and dig, but she warned her, you can never dig up the big turnip. It's the mother of all turnips. And it would be very dangerous for you to do so. Bad things would happen. And of course, Feather Woman found the big turnip and she became so enchanted with this turnip. And she was just like, I have to have this. This would be amazing to bring home as food. This is like the biggest, best turnip ever. I don't know, if you think of like people that fish and just always want to get the biggest fish, but that was what was on Feather Woman's mind. And so she kept returning to the turnip, and finally she just decided, I have to pull up this big turnip. And so she spent all day with her little digging stick going around and around this turnip and digging it and digging it and digging it. And finally she goes to pull it out. And this turnip is so big that when she pulled it out, there was a hole in Sky World. And she looked down through the hole all the way down to Earth, and she found her village down below. And she saw the people working, and she became very homesick for her mother and her father. And she tried to put the turnip back, but she was so sad, and she remembered how much she missed her family and her friends and everything back on Earth. And so when Morningstar came home later, he saw Feather Woman crying, trying to pretend that she hadn't dug up the big turnip. But of course, he knew that she couldn't stay in Sky World any longer. And so he had Spider-Man, a different Spider-Man than Peter Parker, but Spider-Man, weave a basket for Feather Woman and their child, actually, and send them back down to Earth, where she brought prairie turnips to the people. And there is another story. There is a part 2 where she has a child that grows up on Earth and has to make his way back to Sky World. But that's a story for a different day. That is the story of how we got prairie turnips, though. And of course, you look at them and they look much like a standard turnip, but they are similar to like a potato, for example, except they have a much lower glycemic value. They're high in vitamin C. They can be eaten raw, but they can also be cooked both whole like this. You can see that they have to be peeled, kind of like I was talking about peeling the arrowleaf balsam root. And then they were braided, like you'll see garlic braids. These were traditionally braided together and dried so that they could be rehydrated throughout the winter. So this makes it very, very easily for folks to grab big braids of prairie turnips and take them with them as they moved camp. And then of course, these could also be ground down and used to make a flour, to make a type of biscuit, or to thicken stews with. So root vegetables, we love them. More root vegetables. This is, of course, some of our wild onions. We have a lot of wild onions across Turtle Island, and almost anything within that allium genus is edible. So you will have different types of wild onions. I think we have like 10 different types of wild onions on the Blackfeet Reservation alone. We have a lot of wild onions. So I'm not going to go into the different details, but it is pretty easy to tell what is a wild onion. It smells like a wild onion. I will say that I am familiar of stories of people that have mistaken wild onions, or that have mistaken death camas for wild onions. So that is an oversight that should not occur because it doesn't smell like onions. But there have been mistakes that have been made before, and people have ended up hospitalized. So become familiar with the wild onions in your area. They're a great wild food, and wild onions can of course be clipped and dried and then thrown into soups and used as seasoning throughout the entire year. These are our biscuit roots. So our biscuit roots are all in the Lomatium genus, and our Lomatiums are a lot of different biscuit roots, but the two that I'll bring to your attention are this one on the left, which is our fern leaf biscuit root, our Lomatium dissectum. which you will see often in dry prairies all the way up to mountainsides. You have probably seen this and perhaps not realized that you've seen it, but the root itself of this biscuit root looks like the middle picture here, this root, and it is an incredible aid for respiratory illnesses. So again, we are now seeing peer-reviewed studies that demonstrate this traditional knowledge that Blackfeet people, as well as other Indigenous nations, have been using for a long period of time. Let me get up real quick because I have a biscuit root I could show you. Here we go. So this is a cutting from a biscuit root. Smells incredibly potent. I should make a tincture of it, but it's really good as a medicine for respiratory illnesses. So it was something that people were using to treat COVID with, as it helps the lungs and helps expand the health of the respiratory system. The other one, just briefly off to the side, that's a 9-leaf biscuit root. Again, similar, these roots are edible, they are medicinal, and these are roots that were dug up and dried and then traditionally used. So I love pointing out root vegetables because I think that they're really cool foraged food that not everyone is aware of because they're not able to see the actual part that's edible until they dig it up. You know what I didn't put in here is camas though, but I'm hoping one of the other ethnobotany speakers talked about camas because I have so many other plants to talk about. So I wanted to tell the story of the Growing Health program, which is a really cool program that was started, let's see, early last summer by Fast Blackfeet, which I am, of course, on the board of, and so I have to brag about some of the cool work we're doing here. Fast Blackfeet operates the oil pantry, which means we are eating in Blackfeet, and the oil food pantry wanted to prioritize, of course, giving people healthy food, traditional food, but also healthy beverages. And so the healthiest beverage option is, of course, traditional teas. So teas made from native plants that Blackfeet people would have traditionally harvested and then brewed into teas and decoctions, essentially. So obviously we didn't have a supplier on the reservation that was making teas in a big enough quantity for us to buy from. So instead, we ended up serving pantry participants, asking folks if they would be interested in growing traditional plants and learning more about our traditional teas, and offering them the resources to be able to start their own businesses growing teas. And so we set up 10 different families with these raised garden beds. Actually, a couple of them actually had direct till where they were planted into the ground. We set them up with soil. We got starter plants. Some of them were bought through the Center for Native Plants. Some of them were donated by the Glacier Park Nursery. Thank you. And we were able to create these little gardens of native plants that we offered instructional videos actually by YouTube and webinar throughout the course of last summer. They went through the project of planting the plants together with the program coordinator at the time, and then how to take care of the plants. We had to, of course, go back and fence the garden beds off because the res dogs were getting into them. Biggest issue with gardens was not the weather, was just the res dogs. And then, of course, the process of harvesting these plants so that they could be safely harvested and grown and dried and then made into tea blends. And then at the end of the growing season, we set up a weigh and pay station at the pantry. So the pantry participants could bring in an amount of dried plants that they had, and then be paid based on the quantity that they brought in. So this is a picture, of course, building the raised garden bed. And I can tell you some of the plants that we had for the gardens. So plants you guys are probably familiar with. This is yarrow, which is Achillea millefolium. Achillea millefolium sounds similar, obviously, to Achilles. And our stories tell us that our Blackfeet warriors took yarrow with them into battle. Greek stories say that Achilles took yarrow with him into battle. Yarrow has some incredible blood clotting properties. So if you are cut in the woods, on the prairies, and you won't stop bleeding, and you could find some yarrow, if you get some yarrow leaves, chew them up and put them basically as a poultice on your wound, it will stop your bleeding. It was used in childbirth for the same reasons. And of course, this is what made Achilles invincible, right? It's this plant. Yarrow is also an amazing tea, and it has a flavor profile similar to tarragon, interestingly. So it's been used as a seasoning across the entire Northern Hemisphere, where it is a native plant. Yarrow is, let's see, I harvested some yarrow that, show you guys how this, so anything above ground is edible. So this is harvested. I just tied it with a little rubber band at the end, put a paper clip through it and hung it inside. If you do harvest anything like this for teas, I would recommend hanging it in a dry, dark space. It doesn't need to be totally dark, but you're trying to tell the plant that it's time to die peacefully and to not try to live by growing towards the sunlight. So I always think if you're going to harvest anything, you should harvest in the morning after the dew dries, but before the afternoon when the sun burns off some of the more flavorful compounds and oils within the plant. And then if you're making anything into tea, you want to let this thing dry until it's absolutely crispy. So if I were to grab leaves, they will crumble in my fingers. I'm delicately putting this back here and showing the ferny leaf. If I can pull it up on my screen, kind of a ferny looking leaf. Sure, my camera doesn't like doing that. But yarrow, it's a great plant. It's a good medicine plant.
Does the dried yarrow work as well for stopping bleeding? Is a question in the chat.
That's a good question. I've never tested that, but I would assume yes. I would assume that if it's been dried out for as long as this yarrow has been dried out, probably not. But obviously, if warriors were taking it into battle with them, it was part of that herb pouch, and they can't always be refreshing fresh herbs in there all the time. But most of the time, if I'm in a situation where I need to use a plant medicine like that, yarrow grows almost everywhere in the entire state of Montana. So it is pretty easy for me to find yarrow. That's a good question. I will figure out a way to test that. But the IRB is probably not going to approve any methods that I would be using to test that. So,
and there's do you only use the leaves for tea, or can you use the flowers and stems as well?
You can use the flowers and stems as well. Anything above ground in yarrow, totally good to use. Any aerial parts, above ground components are fair game for the yarrow. Cool. I'm gonna hop to another plant. This is our plant. This has so many names also. So this is called bee balm, wild bergamot, monarda, munaguppy is what Blackfeet people call it, and horse mint. I think those are all names that we use for this plant in the States, as well as other indigenous names. So this plant is really cool. It's, of course, I think it's in the mint family. I can double check that, but it is a really good medicinal plant. The flowers, when they're dried, have this, I mean, you can put them in your mouth and basically wait until they dissolve. They'll help numb your throat. It's like better than chloroseptic. That's cool. but the leaves have a flavor profile really similar to oregano. So if I were looking for a substitute for Italian spices in dishes, definitely put in some of the wild bergamot. Also, this is crumbling on me. Thank you, leaves. But this is what it looks like when it's all dried out. Again, if you're gonna make anything into tea, you want it to be super crackly, because then you're probably gonna package it up somehow, and if you have any moisture in it, it'll mold. So these are my leaves. Again, not a great picture of a leaf here, but great, since I'm gonna go grind it up and put it in a spice bottle. I put this in like pizza crusts and stuff before. It's lovely, but it can of course be made into a medicinal tea. And we have a lot of different varieties. These are often also sold in different plant stores and things. So you may already have this planted in your garden. Who's to say? But it is a really cool native plant that we have here. We wait until the flower is blooming to harvest it because the flower has so many medicinal properties in it itself. So that is a cool part of this plant, our money guppy. So raspberries, this is a terrible picture. Why did I put this picture in here? You guys know what raspberries look like, though, hopefully. So raspberries are an indigenous species to Montana. It's the same genus and species actually as the raspberries that we cultivate commercially, but those are a little bit bigger. So it's that slight species differentiation that we have between our European, our Eurasian varieties of raspberries and the ones that we have here in Montana that grow wild, of course. So if you go up into Glacier, you'll be able to find wild raspberries growing very easily. I have a patch of raspberries that I did not realize was a patch of raspberries when I moved into this house. And I was cleaning out some brush and I just incinerated things because traditional Blackfeet land management is fire. And I did not realize until later that it was an entire patch of raspberries. Fortunately, anything within the rubus genus loves disturbance, like me burning it. So they were very happy to come back and be raspberries. So I was able to harvest some really lovely raspberries this last summer. But Blackfeet people traditionally use the raspberry leaves as a women's tea. So the leaves themselves can be made into tea. Even in years when raspberries are not blooming and producing fruit, they can still be used to harvest and make tea. So it's interesting because of some of those, I don't know, you could say detoxing properties, I'm using scare quotes, but kind of that anti-bloating regulation that raspberry leaves produce. Because of that, they have also been marketed as a weight loss tool in capsules. Red raspberry leaf tea, weight loss. It's really more of an anti-bloating thing. It helps both in pregnancy and with non-pregnant women's cycles. And so this is something, again, I don't have any right here on me, but raspberry leaf, you can clip it, hang it upside down, dry it, and make yourself some tea from the leaves. And we know that raspberries love to be cut. You want to cut some raspberries down, they will love you. They'll come back even stronger than ever. So raspberries are a lovely plant. And then of course they produce a delicious fruit. Raspberries and thimbleberries are of course both in the rubus genus. Thimbleberries have slightly different properties, but they both have delicious fruits. I didn't put any thimbleberry pictures into this presentation, but similar, they have a delicious fruit and they love disturbance. Here's some elderberries. This is actually, I didn't have any pictures of our native elderberries, so I put up a picture of our basic Sambucus, our elderberries here. So we do have a couple of native varieties of elderberries in Montana. I think our blue elderberries and our black elderberries, and I think our dwarf elderberries too. We have 3. And elderberries are all in that category of do not eat raw, kind of like choke cherries, because of that cyanide compound in them. However, you can dry them out and you can heat them up, and that will help destroy the cyanide that's found in elderberry seeds. So it's really easy to harvest elderberries, dry them, and then either make them into a tea or to rehydrate them and juice them later. And then you can make your own elderberry syrup. I've made elderberry barbecue sauce. And what's interesting is now we also have those peer-reviewed studies demonstrating their antiviral properties, specifically in combating the flu. So elderberry is really great for that as well. All important things worth mentioning. We have a couple of places where we have a really strong elderberries growing. If you're in the western part of the state, you're going to have better luck finding these. I know they grow like up on Big Mountain in the Flathead, so you would be able to find them there. They're probably around Missoula, but they definitely like a little bit wetter climate, so probably more likely to find them in the Northwest. Rose hips. It's almost time for me to just take questions and be bombarded by questions, but rose hips are really great. You want to remove the seeds from them before you dry them out, but you can also eat them raw. That's totally fine. Remove the seeds. The seeds will irritate you. Blackfeet people call them itchy oozy berries, which I'm not really going to translate, but just don't eat them. They can be made into a tea. They're really, really high in vitamin C, and they stay on the bushes throughout the winter, and they kind of dry out themselves throughout the winter, but that makes them useful as an emergency food source. Of course, we have different types of our wild mint that grows. So this is our delicious mint. Blackfeet people used mint to season just about anything. Of course, mint also traditionally was mixed with tallow, and you can make a chest rub. What is Vicks vapor rub besides menthol and fat, right? Traditional Blackfeet medicine right there. But we would season meat with mint. We would make teas with it. It was used for a lot of different things. And then cedar. Okay. Hey, hold on. Puppies, no, come here. Come here. Sorry, there's like people pumping our septic tank right now, and it's driving the dogs insane. So I have a couple of cedar here right now. I'll put that here. Maybe you can see it a little bit better if it's up against my hand. So, so cedar, this is cedar. This is our western red cedar. This is in the Thuya genus. Not to be mistaken with juniper, though that is often called cedar. A lot of cedar, or a lot of juniper is mislabeled as cedar, which is fine for a lot of things. They are interchangeable. But you can make a lovely tea out of these little branches. This is super dried out. I would use them fresh if you have access to them. So if you're in the western part of the state, I know there's a teacher from West Glacier that chimed in here. I was going to say, you have cedar growing like right outside your school. I would harvest it not directly by the street or the railroad tracks, and not in the park, obviously. But if you have access to this, go and take some scissors and cut some of the fresher leaves off of the end of the branches, those fresher flat cedar leaves, and boil them in some water for about 30 minutes. And then you can sweeten it with a little bit of maple syrup, but you don't even have to do that. Cedar tea is really delicious and super high in vitamin C. One of the earliest documented cures for scurvy. The earliest documented cure for scurvy was from a guy that was stationed in a fort in the 1600s in Ontario, I think. And he saw Native people knew how to cure scurvy, and it was with a white cedar tea, actually, also in the Thuya genus, still related. Also, any pine needle tea is very high in vitamin C. Nobody's getting scurvy on our watch. That's what we've learned today. Lots of fun things. I also point out all these fun tea plants because I think being able to identify some of the plants in your area, whether it's rose hips and yarrow and you're in a drier part of Montana, or you have access to cedar and elderberries and you're in a more wet part of the state, I think it makes a really great activity for kids to learn more about plants, to go through the process of harvesting, drying things, and then being able to drink something that they had a role in making. You know, with kids not always having access to gardens in their life, it's really cool for them to be able to see that plant magic in action and to be able to consume it in some way and interact with their landscape in positive ways. As for what I do, I typically make a lot of cooking videos using some of these foods as well as other plant and animal foods from around Turtle Island, as I mentioned. So real quickly, you can see a lake trout crusted in blue cornmeal. This is actually harvested through the native fish folks down on from Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. So they're pulling out the invasive lake trout from Flathead Lake, and I get to cook them. And this is a lamb's quarter pesto, just made with some lamb's quarter and sunflower seeds, actually. So that's in the top left. We have a choke cherry braised rabbit with some pecans and cranberries on a little cornbread. And then I had a spinach salad underneath here because I didn't have any fresh lamb's quarter. I think it was winter, but that was food as well. These are pumpkin seed peanut butter cookies, of course, made with maple sugar rather than white sugar. Super easy to make. I've also done the same recipe with sunflower butter in kids' classrooms. So if you're lucky enough to have access to an oven, that's a super fun thing to do. And then this is a sunflower butter caramel that I made, which is like the fastest snack food you can make, and you can learn how to pop popcorn, which I also love to talk about all of these other fun Indigenous foods too, like corn, but it's a story for a different time. This is my contact information. Anyone's able to find me, reach out to me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and website, whatever suits your purposes. Ignore me forever. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to chime in. Thank you, Native Fish Keepers. Thank you.
So Mariah, you can go until 5:15 and then we can do questions and answers if there's other things that you want to share.
Nope, if there are questions, I'm probably gonna spend way too long answering people's questions because I go into too much detail when I answer people's questions anyway, so.
We like detail. We absolutely love detail. So one question that I have is, you know, how would a primary grades teacher, you know, kindergarten, first, second grade, how would they approach this information with their kids, would you recommend?
So I think that, you know, I'm thinking of some of the stuff that my teachers did with my classes when I was in preschool through elementary school. And a lot of that work was just being able to get us outside and do plant walks. So, you know, we look at, I remember walking through places and our teachers having us like touch trees. And I remember like the friendly fir, like identifying Douglas firs because they were soft and they had flat needles, and learning about just different identification from that perspective. But also, you know, knowing how to identify food that was edible. Kids love eating things that they find in their landscape, and being able to learn more about those things are super, super important and help kids connect with that. Also having projects where they are able to dedicate a little bit of their time every day or over the course of a period of time. So, you know, one day where you go out and harvest and then you tie everything up, and maybe it's yarrow, maybe it's picking rose hips and cleaning them out as a class and getting the seeds cleaned out and then drying them out or putting them out on like a big cookie sheet or something so that they're able to air dry, or you have an oven or dehydrator or something like that, and they're able to go through that process. And then the next time they come, they get to use like a mortar and pestle to crush them up, or they get to take their dried yarrow and grind them up into smaller pieces. And then the next time they come to class, they get to drink tea with it, or they get to experiment flavoring food. I work with, you know, kids classes where we make no-bake cookies, essentially, by taking sunflower seeds, and you can grind them up using a mortar and pestle, just raw sunflower seeds, and then you add enough maple syrup so that they stick together. And then you can pan fry them until they brown on both sides, or you can just eat them. It's just sunflower seeds and maple syrup, and it's totally safe to eat. And you have little protein bites, but they get a chance to make it. They get a chance to get their hands dirty for a second. And if you're in a space where you can grow sunflowers, you can even incorporate that extra step of going out and harvesting them and drying the sunflower heads, and then taking all of the shells off of all of the sunflowers, winnowing them, and being able to incorporate that over multiple weeks. And then finally it cultivates and making cookies together. So finding ways that get kids involved and connected to their landscapes. Those are some of the examples that I think of.
Awesome. And then a follow-up to that, what is your favorite dish to cook with children or younger ones?
So I mentioned obviously cookies. So sunflower seed maple cookies are really, really easy to cook with folks. But if I'm working with classrooms, I think I did like a Zoom class with a group of Girl Scouts, and we ended up making those sunflower butter cookies. And so not the sunflower seed cookies, but actually using sunflower butter, like a peanut butter cookie. But I know that a lot of classrooms can't have peanut butter in them. And so, it's basically pumpkin seeds and sunflower butter and a little bit of maple sugar and eggs. And then you stick everything in a blender and you get to grind it all up, and then you get to make little balls and then cross hatch them with a fork and bake cookies. And even though they're traditional ingredients, this isn't like a traditional recipe, but it is taking foods that recognize ancestral wisdom and incorporating them into the classroom. I think that's super fun, but it requires an oven. Other things that I've done are, of course, talking about popcorn and doing popcorn work in the class. We had a super fun time in a consumer science class in Cut Bank recently doing, let's see, what did we make? We made, well, one was sunflower seed and maple cookies, but we also made zucchini pizza bites, which obviously cheese is not an indigenous food. But we did cut up zucchinis, and it was right in the middle of zucchini season at the beginning of the school year. And so we got to cut up zucchinis into little discs and then put them on baking sheets with a little blob of tomato sauce and then a little bit of cheese on top, and bake them in the oven. And a lot of kids walked away super excited about zucchinis, which I count as a win. They were more excited about zucchini pizza bites than bagel bites. So that was a big win. And it gave them something to do where they were able to do little tasks and to get involved with it. And also eat delicious food at the end of the day. If I have 7th graders leaving a room and saying, I'm going to ask my mom to buy a zucchini, that's great. That's great for me.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And your recipe is on your IndigiKitchen site. And I did post the recipe link also in the resources, and I will add some more resources tomorrow. Can you tell us a bit about how you honor, acknowledge plants, water in a respectful way before harvest?
Yeah. So there are a lot of plants that are navigating challenges with over harvesting. So I think of, for example, prairie turnips. Prairie turnips have seeds that have a really thick seed coat. They're kind of similar to lupin seeds, if anyone's ever seen those. They are a legume, and so they're in pods, and they require that scarification, that breaking of the seed coat, in order to germinate. So in natural settings, that takes place with either several freeze-thaw cycles or low-intensity prairie fires. Without the Blackfeet and other tribes' traditional practice of burning prairies, that has caused some populations of prairie turnips to decline. And so it's interesting because I think about this idea of not just what kind of delicious plants can we put in our bodies that are healthy for us, but also where is our responsibility to taking care of the plants, and not just the plants, but the land and the air and the water where the plants come from. Where is our relationship of reciprocity in all of that? That said, there are a lot of plants that are not in danger of over harvesting. You know, I think of our yarrow and our rose hips and our things like that. But I'm also very cautious that I'm never harvesting all of the plants from one area. There are scales, if you look up anything in Montana, you know, plant identification websites, or botanical surveys, it will show relative frequency of plants of certain species in your area. So I know that yarrow is number 5 of the least concern, whereas our elderberry is about a 1 and a 2, depending on what type of elderberry we have. So I'm actually going to do some work to try to take some elderberry cuttings before the snow melts, and to be able to see if I can do some elderberry starts and plant some around my house here. We'll see if that works. But it's definitely, you know, knowing the plants that you're harvesting, their relative frequency, and then of course, you know, putting down tobacco, or, you know, thanking the plants for that gift, for sharing their knowledge, and to be able to, you know, appreciate that. And also, there are plant stories. I think it's a hawthorn that we have here, and I have to remember the actual name of it. But it's a berry, and our Blackfeet stories tell us it is edible, but if you do not harvest it in the correct way, then it will cause your stomach to get upset. And if you're a man, you have to make, trying to remember the specific protocol. I can't remember if you're a man what you have to do, but if you're a woman, you have to take its leaves and you have to like sew tiny moccasins out of them. And then you give the tiny moccasins to the plant, and then you're able to eat the berries. I don't know anyone that knows how to make the tiny moccasins out of the hawthorn leaves, so I need to learn more about this. Until then, I have not tried eating the berries from this plant. And I'm also wondering how this connects with our ecological knowledge of this. But you have to honor the gifts that the plant is giving you, because if not, it will mess up your stomach. And so that's a story I think about that is kind of funny, but also is definitely a lesson for remembering that the plant is giving a part of itself to take care of us, and we can take care of it in return. But I also think that's what makes it so special about harvesting from the land, is knowing exactly where things are coming from.
I am now obsessed with seeing tiny moccasins made from leaves.
A summer project to do. Thank you, Robin, for posting the plant species of concern list.
Yes. Oh, and a reminder, if you could all put your questions in the Q&A, then they don't get lost in the chat. I only have one screen tonight. So how often was corn part of the Blackfeet diet, and was it traded or grown locally?
Corn, not really part of the Blackfeet diet, I'm not gonna lie. I'm also enrolled Cherokee, so I will talk about corn because that was super important to the Cherokee. But corn, if anyone in Montana has tried to grow corn, it is a challenge. We do definitely have some species of corn that can grow here. And I know that we do have a lot of acres of corn in production, but it's pretty much all commercial, hyper fertilized nonsense. But there are some really great varieties of Hidatsa corn that have been rebred into Montana varieties, heirloom corn. So I can show you my little corn cobs that I grew. They're about this big. And the corn plants were pretty small because I'm in Bab and we have the wind and the corn doesn't want to grow very tall here. but I was still able to grow corn at 5,600 feet in elevation. So it can be done. Find the local plants that grow in your area. As for trading, Blackfeet didn't traditionally trade for a lot of corn. That said, we also journeyed quite far, and we were able to trade for a lot of other things, but not a lot of record of corn. We liked our root vegetables a lot more than corn. They provided a lot of those starches in our diets.
All right, thank you. What is the predominant plant fast Blackfeet grows in traditional tea gardens?
Yeah, all those that I mentioned, the mint, the horse mint or the wild bergamot, the raspberry, the elderberry, the rose hips were all grown in the as well as sage. But I need to look at, I think we grew, it's colloquially called man sage. I'll have to look up the scientific name for it. But we did connect with all of those plants in our tea gardens. The elderberry did not do well. We used the elderberry from the Center for Native Plants, and that is not the variety of elderberry that we have on this side of the mountains. It wasn't happy. I am also curious to see how some of these native plants do in raised bed situations, because the frost, of course, comes from all sides instead of just the top down. So we, of course, have some that are direct tilled and some that are in raised beds, and I hope that they do great. But we're going to see in the spring. We're also going to expand into vegetable gardens this year. So super excited about that, and to offer classes on gardening in Blackfeet country, which is a whole other project. It can be done. As I said, I grew peppers and corn and squash and tomatoes and everything here. So if we can do it here, it can be done.
How can schools get involved with the Growing Health program?
That's a good question. Schools, I mean, I just think kids should have some little garden to grow native plants in, and to learn more about native teas. We're working on updating our Fast Blackfeet website, and we'll have more information about the Growing Health program there, and some of our traditional teas. We also, my partner and I, sell teas that we grow on splitsuncreations.com. So that's an option if anyone's really wanting to try these plants, but you're like, it's the middle of winter. How would I get a native tea right now? We do have them for sale on there. And then, yeah, I think the great thing about native tea gardens is that they're native plants and you don't have to baby them all summer when you're not at school. You can put them somewhere. Maybe there's a drain pipe that gets some water running off the roof of the building or somewhere. You know, you check on them because it hasn't rained in 40 days or whatever. But for the most part, you can grow native plants without having to babysit them. And then the kids can come back in the fall and you're able to harvest teas together in September. So there's definitely some cool things to do.
Awesome.
Someone asked a question about sunflowers. I see that. I'm working on the most efficient way of winnowing sunflower seeds. Once I figure that out, I will post a video. I have a whole bunch of sunflower seeds sitting on my counter right now, and I'm trying to figure out how to take them out of their shell efficiently. I would say utilize child labor. Not a good answer, but I'm like, you have access to kids, take these sunflowers out of their shells so we can make cookies with them. That's not a great solution. I will think of something better.
Do you absolutely need to dry the elderberries first, or
you don't have to dry the elderberries first. I'm just almost always too busy when I'm harvesting elderberries to make the syrup right away. So it's pretty easy to throw them in the water, and I let them kind of simmer for about 30 minutes, and then I'll put them right into a blender, like that whole mixture into a blender, just liquefy everything, and then I'll squeeze it through a cheesecloth, but you don't have to do that blender step. And then you'll squeeze it through the cheesecloth, and that will get all of the juice out. And then a lot of people will say just add raw honey until it's syrup. I will tend to not add that much to make it syrup, and I'll just drink it more like a juice, because if I'm sick, I don't need to drink a lot of sugar, even if it is raw honey. And then I'll actually add a little bit of cinnamon and like a dash of clove powder into it too. The cinnamon will help with the preservation.
Great, thank you. What are some of your favorite seasonings that you find on the landscape to use?
Oh, I mentioned some of them: arrowleaf balsam root shoots, yarrow, managapi. Cedar actually is a great seasoning by itself. If you cut up your cedar, you can use that, throw it in an omelet or something. Obviously, like with rosemary or other types of seasonings, you want to make sure you're cutting it into little pieces. You're trying it, you're sampling it with something, and you're kind of figuring out the flavor profile that it has, so you have an idea of what to blend. And then, of course, chilies are indigenous to Mexico, and we love seasoning things with hot chilies. Of course, we call them peppers because Columbus ended up in the New World, and he thought he was in India looking for spices, tasted something spicy, and decided it was pepper, like peppercorn. And so now we call all the chilies peppers, even the ones that aren't spicy. So thanks, Columbus.
What are you excited about for the future?
Oh, so much. I'm excited that we're going to help Fast Blackfeet harvest bison from outside of Yellowstone to use in the food pantry. I'm excited about the hide tanning class we're doing next week. I'm excited about the kids cookbook because I think that's super exciting. I definitely pulled out all of the cookbooks I had when I was a kid and figured out my favorite pages and the recipes that I remembered from a kid and why I liked those cookbooks. So that's something fun. I'm excited about planting vegetable gardens on the reservation and just having people get more fresh foods. I'm excited about potentially starting a farmer's market in Bab, because of course we need a farmer's market in Bab, and I make cool soaps that I think I could also sell there. And I'm excited for all fun things. I'm also excited about this project I'm working on, which is actually filming Native knowledge keepers sharing traditional recipes. And then I'm creating videos for their recipes in that anonymous format that I use, and then merging it with their interviews. So I just released one of those. If you go to my Facebook page or website or anything, you can see a really lovely video of Teresa Romero sharing her recipe for mesquite blue cornbread. So that's I was like, I'm gonna be doing a lot more of those. I'm super excited about it. I have recipes from across Turtle Island, and I don't have to come up with them. I just get to make them for other people. So
that's awesome.
That's a fun project too.
Do you come into schools? Are you available to do programming in schools?
Yep. Obviously, I've mentioned a couple of things that I did at the Cut Bank schools earlier this year. I've done virtual presentations for folks. I was like, let's see, I worked with the Columbia Falls School a few years ago, the Kalispell Middle School. I spent a week down in Helena at, I think, Rossiter Elementary, working with all of the elementary school students there. So yes, definitely love doing school programs, because I think there's a lot of fun things that we can do with kids. We can talk about everything from Three Sisters gardening to wild foraging, or I mean, they threw me in the AP chemistry classes and AP bio classes because of my science background, and we talked about chemistry labs that we can use acids and bases for, because wood ash and water makes it alkaline, and you can use that to remove the hull of the corn and make hominy. And there's a lot of really fun things that can be discussed. I use food as a vehicle to talk about everything. So it's a fun opportunity.
Thank goodness.
Someone asked if you blend the berries, what about the pits? They come out, oh, are you asking? Okay, elderberries. I just saw that. Those will come out when you squeegee them through a cheesecloth. How can I order your kids' cookbook? I don't have it yet, but if you follow me on social media, I will let everyone know when it exists. Right now it is.
We'll also
I was gonna say a fig Newton of my imagination, but that's not really true either. So
we'll also let you know on the website with our, we'll probably put a link to, you know, your book on the how you can order it.
when it exists, you'll know.
I had a question about, are you looking forward to your April 2nd food and ethnobotany workshop with OPI?
I'm looking forward to it.
So April 2nd, Mariah will be back with us. The registration form, we will put the registration link in the chat here soon. And so yes, we have 2 ethnobotany series coming up April 2nd with, it'll be split between Mariah and Raina, who was one of our presenters. And then on April 9th will be Tim Ryan, and he'll be using plants as tools. So super, super excited about that. When you said excited, the question came up for that. I was like, yay, I know I'm excited about having you back for sure.
Yeah, and that one will definitely be structured more like a cooking demonstration. It will be a cooking demonstration, but using native plants, and I'll be able to share a fun recipe with you guys and tell some of the stories of those plants as we make it.
Are there any indigenous seed sellers or plant sellers in Montana that you know, can be supported as indigenous business owners, as well as contributing to more native plants being planted for our critters?
Great question. So the only native seed keepers that I know of in Montana that are doing anything with seed packets is MIFC, which is the Montana Indigenous Food Sovereignty Initiative. And I don't know if they make their seed packets available commercially. I think there are lots of great seed keepers in the state. So there's definitely a lot of really great folks to support. And there's also, I think, let's see, let me stop sharing my screen for a second. I'm going to look it up right now, but you can ask me another question while I'm doing that.
Have you made jelly with elderberries?
I haven't made jelly with elderberries. I haven't done I've never done any jelly, to be honest with you. I don't know why that's the thing that I haven't done, but I haven't. So I'm going to drop, let's see, I'm going to drop a website of a native seed keeper. Let's see. Source for indigenous plants to buy and grow. If you want to support a native seed company, I dropped one as a answer, I think. Oh no, it's disappeared. I think it went to the answered section. But I can drop that in the chat here. They're based somewhere. I think they're in the East Coast. But that is a native organization. But honestly, there's so many folks that are working on revitalizing native varieties of plants, and they're doing really good work. And then as they expand, they do end up offering things commercially. I'm going to also drop another seed keeper page into the chat, and it is the Alliance of Native Seed Keepers. Of course, nope, just kidding. That's not what I did. I did the wrong thing. I pasted the wrong thing for you guys. I'm sorry. Indigenous Seed Keepers Network is who I was trying to find. Because they work on some cool stuff. They work on seed rematriation. So they will grow old varieties of seeds and return the seeds to the tribe that ancestrally have grown them. Some of these are very rare, or the tribe didn't have access to the seeds any longer, so they work on doing some of that seed saving work and then rematriating them. So that's kind of a cool story. You know, kids, depending on the age, would probably be fascinated to learn about some of that stuff, about seed keeping in general, which is a super cool process. And it, you know, there's different things that folks can learn. If you have a classroom at school, that's, you know, a big opportunity for folks to jump on that. But even if you don't, if you have a tomato plant in a pot that is, you know, still alive at the start of the school year, to be able to bring that inside and have that on a windowsill and to go through the process of fermenting your tomato seeds and then harvesting the seeds, because tomato seed saving is a little weird. Just fun things to do with kids over a course of days, you know, a little bit each day, and you can learn more about seeds.
And seeds are amazing. I loved how I think it was Raina. Oh no, it was Robin Kimmerer. I went to a webinar of hers just last week, and she was talking about the mystery of, you know, how a seed contains everything it needs to turn into a baby plant. And, you know, when you think about the extraordinary processes, when you put a seed in the ground, I planted my very first seeds last year for my very first garden. And it's just been extraordinary. I actually planted my first seeds just yesterday and got them over to a friend who has more light than I do and more heat than I do. So I'm anxious to see what happens this year with those. But I think you're absolutely right. You know, when you have a classroom and you have any windows at all, you know, to have the kids, I know sunflower seeds have been really successful in classroom. Beans. Oh, that's one thing that people often ask about is the three sisters. Do you have any thoughts on growing the three sisters?
Yeah, so the three sisters are, of course, an incredible polycultural planting and growing method that has been used in different ways across Turtle Island. So folks up in the northeast to the southeast to the southwest have, actually into Mexico, have used the three sisters, which of course refers to corn, beans, and squash, as a method of sustainably planting and harvesting and growing three very diverse plants together. So corn, we know, grows straight up, tall and skinny, and beans need something to hang on to, so they hold on to corn. And then, of course, squash spreads out on the ground and really shades the ground for it prevents weeds from coming up in that area. It also helps shade the ground to reduce moisture loss from the mound that they're all planted in. And then those little hairs on squash prevent a lot of pests from crawling on everything and consuming all of the plants. So people will plant. So sorry. Hold on.
In real life.
So people will plant corn first, and then they will plant beans after the corn sprouts, so that there is a structure for beans to hold on to when they need something to grab. The corn will already be growing. This is the most interested my dogs have been in one of our seminars. So sorry.
Okay.
So the beans, of course, are a legume, which means they have nitrogen fixing bacteria. And thank you so much, Amy. Your links and information is super important as I'm watching it pop up here. just everything. Amy also mentioned, by the way, that dried yarrow is just as powerful as fresh yarrow. So thank you.
The resources that Amy's listing on the resource list tomorrow.
Awesome. That nitrogen fixing bacteria in the root nodules of beans help replenish the soil of that really valuable nutrient that the other plants are feeding off of very heavily. And then of course we know that corn, as this grain, essentially it functions like a kind of a starch. People were not traditionally eating corn like sweet corn that you're thinking of now. It was more nixtamalized, which is that chemical process of treating it with an alkaline solution, so that it was either made into hominy or it could be ground down into masa, corn flour, and used to make cornbread. Way more digestible, way less glycemic value, by the way, but acts more like a starch rather than a like a vegetable. Corn doesn't really function like a vegetable in that way. But corn, beans, and squash do form a complete protein when eaten together. So that's really cool as well. They support each other physically, chemically, and nutritionally. And then, of course, the planting method also helps reduce water loss, and it serves as pest control. And it's really, really great companion planting. Some people will also plant sunflowers as a border. Sometimes that's referred to as the fourth sister in places. Sunflowers have a chemical in their roots that actually inhibit growth of certain plants, which makes them great as a border, so that they will kind of prevent seed spread. But do not plant sunflowers and expect beans to grow up sunflowers, because the chemical in the sunflower roots will kill the beans. Sorry, don't try it. But that is a great option and provides another delicious edible protein rich seed.
My chickadees did a lot of voluntary planting around my place last year, I noticed, which was fine with me.
Sunflowers are tough too. They got snowed on, they got their sunflowers are tough. I feel like as long as they're upright, they're happy. The other thing I would say about corn, beans, and squash and the Three Sisters planting is just look for varieties that grow in your area. So people see pretty pictures in seed catalogs or whatever. I know I got seeds through the Cherokee Nation Seed Bank. I don't expect them to grow well in Montana. It's just, that is a risk, I know. The corn that I grew is from the, let's see, I grew Painted Mountain corn, which is a variety from Montana. I grew beans that I got from the Good Seed Company. I think they're over in Whitefish. And my squash was through the MIFC seed packets that came out of Bozeman. So I was definitely trying to grow things for Montana, and think of indigenous varieties that made sense rather than trying to grow the big 110-day pumpkins. Like, I don't have 110 growing days here. So think small. There are tiny little squashes that are going to grow fine in your growing season, but definitely think about that as you're deciding what plants to plant this year.
Well, thank you so much for this. I can tell from the comments that folks were very, very excited about the knowledge that you shared. And again, folks, the survey will close by 3 o'clock tomorrow. So please make sure to get that feedback survey in, whether you're seeking renewal units or not. So your great feedback will help us do webinars like this in the future. And it is just so heartwarming to see so many of you coming from so far across Montana and so many different places. There is also the link in the chat for the is a virtual workshop series in April 2nd 2nd and April 9th. And if you click on the registration link, there's all kinds of information there, as well as on our website. And I'll also add the information to the resource page if I haven't already. But anyhow, I hope everyone stays safe. Thank you all for joining us for this incredible 6-series ethnobotany webinars. And I just hope that we can do this again and bring you even more information in the future, because I know this was something I looked forward to every single time. And I just thank you all for joining us. And I wish you all peace, and I wish you all health. So take care, and thank you so much. Thank you, Mariah.
Thank you, guys.